Hello and welcome to another video from Mr. Miz Nation, and we're talking the F1 2014 Malaysian Grand Prix that took place this morning at 9 AM in the UK anyway. Bit of a procession, you could say. I mean, it wasn't quite as interesting as Australia, but I mean, it still gave us some valid information about where the cars are, of course, at this current time, and the improvements have been made, especially by teams like Red Bull, who definitely showed ominous signs today about their pace. Really today was all about team orders, Australian woe all over again, and Mercedes domination really, and a couple of other things that happened as well. But I'm going to do the same format that I did last week, just basically going from the bottom of the grid, or the back of the grid, all the way to the first place man in Lewis Hamilton, who cruised to the victory with his teammate Nico Rosberg behind him, but we'll get onto them two later. We'll start with Sergio Perez, who actually didn't even start the race. He had some problems on the, well, just getting to the grid really, when he was stuck in the garage most of the time, and then when he got out on the track, he was having issues where it was just every time he was downshifting it went into neutral. So very odd problem there. Still not quite sure what the exact problem is though. Force India still aren't quite sure, at least that's the vibe that I'm getting. I mean, some people have been saying it's hydraulics problem, but that was Susie Perez, so I don't really know if I trust her or not. But yeah, very disappointing for Perez considering how well his teammate did, and I mean, he was pretty unlucky in Australia 2 weeks ago as well, when he got hit out on the first lap and kind of had to recover from that, and he still managed to kind of scrape a point in the end. So Perez hasn't quite been able to show his full potential yet in that Force India. So it'll be interesting to see if he can finally have one race, maybe next week in Bahrain, where he finally starts to mix it up with the big boys in the higher points positions, like his teammate is doing at the moment. But yeah, frustrating for Perez. Then we actually move on to the race. Maldonado just DNF pretty much on lap 8, I believe it was. He got hit at the start by Bianchi. Bianchi actually had a left rear puncher, I believe, because Verne slightly tapped him into the first few corners, which is why Bianchi went pile driving into Maldonado. So it wasn't actually a driver mistake at all, but very odd to see Maldonado not at fault for a crash, but that was what happened this time. Maldonado not really at fault for the incident, couldn't really do much, and doesn't really help Lotus at all there, really getting hit by a Marussia. But I mean, it's promising news for Lotus that Grosjean was able to drag the car up to 11th, and promising news for Maldonado. So he'll be another driver, much like Perez. He'll be looking to show his potential a bit more in the next couple of races before the European races, where there's going to be a lot of changes, obviously. But frustrated for Maldonado, who lost power kind of around lap 8. Moving on to Bianchi, who I obviously just talked about, got a left rear puncher from getting hit by Verne, and then he obviously couldn't avoid the collision with Maldonado. I mean, pretty much inevitable. And then apparently, the suspicion at Marussia is it was actually a brake problem that caused issues for Bianchi, because Bianchi did go into the pits and get a new front wing and a new tyres as well. So he did actually have a further problem after that, was brake problems, which might also have gone towards the problem that he had, or the collision that he had with Maldonado as well, which probably didn't help at all. But yeah, a bit frustrating for Bianchi. I mean, his teammate is actually kind of beaten him both times now, so Bianchi not having the greatest starts to the season either in that Marussia. Moving on to Jean-Eric Verne, he didn't really have a great race, to be honest. I mean, he was virtually non-existent, DNF'd in the end, damaged his wing, as I said at the start, was a Caterham and a Marussia, obviously causing the left rear puncher of Bianchi. But he just had a loss of power, I think. Very, very quiet about his DNF. I didn't even realise he DNF'd, to be honest, until like halfway through the race, but he did DNF pretty early. But I don't know if he would have been able to get into the points either, really. I mean, he didn't look amazingly quick in qualifying, to be frankly honest, either, so it's definitely a rebuilding process for Jean-Eric Verne as well. Moving on to the two Saubers now. Sutil DNF'd in 18th, similar problem for him, just a loss of power. He'll be frustrated. I mean, he was kind of on the edge of the points, as was his teammate Gutierrez. Gutierrez went into the pits, and then apparently he couldn't engage first gear when he was trying to come out of the pits, so that was a problem that he had, as you kind of saw him when the TV camera went to him. He was kind of in his pit box, struggling to move. But they eventually had to retire the car because of that. So very, very disappointing for the two Saubers, who could have maybe got points with the problems for Ricciardo and a couple of other cars as well. Maybe Raikkonen, of course, as well, who didn't have a great race. But that'll be a bit frustrating for the Saubers, but they'll definitely be looking to make upgrades going into the European season, as they are quite far behind teams like Williams and Force India at the moment, and probably even Toro Rosso, you could say. And they really need to get that reliability better as well. Moving on to the final DNF in 16th place. So we still had quite a few DNFs in this race, but not as many as Australia, which was kind of unexpected for me. I thought there'd be more DNFs around this track, but that's Formula 1, I guess. But 16th place man DNF'd in the end, right towards the end. The disastrous race of Daniel Ricciardo, really. Well, it was a race of two halves, as I like to say, really. First half of the race, brilliant start once again, similar to Australia, dives up the inside of his own teammate and of Fernando Alonso, absolutely mugs two world champions off. Unbelievable drive there at the start, and then obviously apparently those team orders with Red Bull as well to let Vettel through. But Ricciardo was still looking strong for kind of 4th, 5th against kind of Alonso, him and Alonso having a bit of a battle. But then Red Bull pull out their typical Australian kind of problems, I guess, and he just kind of had the unluckiness that Mark Webber had, Daniel Ricciardo, and they just completely they completely botched the pit stop, really, Red Bull, which is kind of unusual for them, unless it is, of course, Webber's car. In fact, they had the exact same problem with Webber in Hungary last year, where the tyre hit the cameraman, if I remember. So luckily that didn't happen this time. 'Cause I remember Christian Horner saying in an interview that they didn't want a repeat of that. But a complete mess up on the tyre, and then it just kind of went from bad to worse from there. I mean, he got a stop and go penalty for the unsafe release, and they obviously had to pull him back, and then he had a puncture, and then he had a front wing failure, and it was just all going wrong. And now he's got a 10th place grid penalty for Bahrain. So I mean, not quite sure why. I think the reason he has a 10th place grid penalty is he didn't serve the 5-second stop and go penalty. Not quite sure about that, but very unlucky for Daniel Ricciardo, really. There really isn't much he could have done in these first two races. I mean, theoretically, if he hadn't had all these problems with the team, if the team didn't cause all these problems for him, was the fuel flow and then the messed up pit stop and broken car, then he could really be second in the championship, because he would probably have 28 points with a second in Australia and then a 5th in this race, or maybe a 6th, but he would have been up there, and instead he's on 0 points, and it's not really helped Red Bull and the constructors, to be frankly honest, either. So disappointing day for Ricciardo, but at least he can bounce back next week. I mean, as I said on my Twitter, I think they're trying to wipe the smile off his face, the whole of F1 really, and especially Red Bull. But I mean, I think it'll only egg him on more to get good results, and I mean, we haven't seen the last of Daniel Ricciardo, obviously. Moving on to Max Chilton, somehow this man just keeps finishing races. I have no idea how. I think this is going to be a constant theme for in my race reviews. Every single week it's going to be like, how the hell did Max Chilton finish? I mean, I think he finished a 10th for second behind Ericsson, which is a bit disappointing that he finishes behind a rookie that's only in his second race, and Chilton's in his like 22nd race, I'm going to say, or probably 21st actually. So that's a bit disappointing for him, but the Mauritius didn't quite seem to be on the pace of Caterham this week, which is a bit surprising, to be honest. But Ericsson, after his woes in qualifying, crashing out very, very poorly in Q1, he managed to kind of drag the car up. No technical issues this week for him, which was promising. And promising for Caterham that they're able to get both cars to the finish in strong positions. So Marcus Ericsson, a very good result in 14th. I do wonder if he'll ever eclipse that result in his F1 career, but we'll see, I guess. Brilliant result for Kobayashi in 13th, who actually managed to mix up with kind of Grosjean and Raikkonen at some points, which was pretty amazing to see. So they have shown kind of hints of pace Caterham now, which is very promising for them. And they obviously beat Max Chilton's result last week, I believe. I think Max Chilton finished 14th last week, or at least matched it, so that helps them get back 10th in the constructors. And of course, with more reliability, well, less reliability issues later in the season, that's certainly going to help them in terms of that 10th place in the Constructors' Championship, which is very important for those two teams, Caterham and Marussia. I guess they're trying to fight back against my claim that they'll be out of business at the end of the year, but I guess we'll see. 12th, Kimi Räikkönen. Another disappointing performance by him. I said it was a disappointing performance last week, 2 weeks ago, and I expected him to kind of bounce back here at Malaysia, but that didn't really happen. Arguably, it wasn't really, well, not really arguably, I mean, it wasn't his fault at all with Magnussen, to be honest. I mean, he got clipped in the rear, there's not much he could have done. A lot of people will say that was unlucky, and that they'll still say that he's on par with Alonso, but I mean, would Alonso get into those positions with Magnussen? That's the question that I would raise. I think Alonso has thoroughly destroyed his teammate so far. I mean, it was disappointing for Raikkonen. He looked very quick in practice, or in the practices, and he wasn't too bad in qualifying either. So I mean, it was disappointing for Raikkonen, who probably could have been 5th or 6th maybe. Would have been in a battle with Hulkenberg. Yeah, I mean, he did have a bit of pace, but he couldn't even get past Grosjean at the end, which was very disappointing. Speaking of Grosjean, superb drive by Romain Grosjean. I mean, this guy is once again proving his worth, and I did say in my F1 2014 season preview that even with a poor car, he could really pull off some of the drives of the season, and this may have been the best drive of his career potentially. I mean, and that's a big thing to say, but 11th in that Lotus car, and he was in the points at some point as well. So I mean, it was an unbelievable drive from him to even put that car up to 11th, considering they're at least 4 or 5 races behind, really. So and I mean, I have no idea how he held Raikkonen off at the end there. That was just ridiculous, how he was able to hold him off. I mean, he said in his interview that he's got so used to racing Raikkonen and knowing his strategies and kind of moves that he just he knew what to do in battle with him. So promising for Lotus that they were finally able to get someone to the finish in the end, and a much bigger improvement on Australia, and they'll kind of be looking to get into the points next, which they almost did in this race. Moving on to 10th place, the first points position, Daniel Kvyat, or however the hell you say his name, as everyone seems to be saying. Another brilliant performance. Once again in the points, thoroughly outscored his teammate again. Well, not again, because Vetronic finished ahead of him a couple of weeks ago, but I mean, it was still a pretty good performance. We didn't really see much of him in the race. I mean, we saw his incident with Alonso in qualifying, but they were both cleared of that. But I mean, Kvyat, relatively silent race, but he still managed to get into the points, and I mean, he just kind of pried off the mistakes of others like Ricciardo and Raikkonen. So a very good performance by Kvyat again, and I mean, he'll be hoping to keep getting those points positions, because then he'll look more favourable for a Red Bull seat, of course. Moving on to 9th place, Kevin Magnussen. A bit of a disappointing performance there for Kevin Magnussen. I mean, K-Mag as they call him, hit the rear tyre of Raikkonen, so he had to get a front wing change when he did his first pit stop, which cost him quite a bit of time. And I mean, it was a relatively quiet race for him after the start, to be honest. Just kind of trying to get back through the field, but I mean, he probably would have been battling with the 2 Williams and battling with his own teammate if he didn't have that collision, which is very unfortunate. And of course, he had the penalty as well that he had to serve, so it didn't really help him. But I mean, he still managed to come away with a few good points that keeps McLaren firmly second in the constructors. So a bit disappointing for me, because I put him higher in my F1 predictor thing, but oh well, he'll definitely be looking to build on or get a better result in Bahrain, of course. Moving on to 8th place and 7th place, I guess the controversy at Williams, I guess you could call it. Felipe, Valtteri is faster than you, I should say. That'd be sweet if Massa heard that. But I burst out laughing when I heard that, to be frankly honest. So did pretty much everyone in the household, and I think most F1 fans did, because it was so ironic, and I think they just completely forgot what happened to Felipe and Hockenheim at that point. But maybe they just did it ironically, or just to piss him off, or maybe they tried to. Maybe that was a tactic. Maybe they were trying to piss him off so he could go faster. Who knows? But yeah, obviously Massa didn't let him through. I didn't want him to let Bottas through either. I mean, Bottas should have worked for it, and he couldn't get through anyway, so how would he have been able to get past Button? Massa, I thought, probably could have got past Button, to be honest. I mean, he had so much more fuel, because they obviously, on the BBC and Sky, they now have how much fuel the cars have used, or the percent the percent of fuel the cars have used even. So Massa, I mean, the Williams were consistently using less than everyone else, so I was like, why are they not pushing much harder? So Massa was probably could have had a bit better, and so could Bottas really, but I mean, they just got stuck behind the McLarens at the start, couldn't quite progress on. But I mean, I would say the Williams just kind of fell down in performance a bit after the first race, because it looks like Red Bull and maybe Ferrari have jumped them. It's very hard to tell with Ferrari. But yeah, Massa and Bottas, very interesting races. Bottas coming through the field well again. He got a very, very good start once again. Massa finally getting his first points as well, which is promising to see for him. Jenson Button, a very solid 6th place. I mean, you wouldn't have expected it after practice, to be honest. I mean, Ron Dennis said that they were going to take half a second out of Mercedes, and they probably lost half a second, to be honest. I mean, they're not quite on the pace of Australia, well, at least they weren't in that race, but Button did very, very well to hold 6th place in a race where he probably could have ended up 8th or 9th, but it was a very tactical drive from him, and he looked absolutely shattered at the end of the race. So yeah, it was a very good drive from a man who I usually criticise, but I mean, they're the type of drives that will put him ahead of Magnussen in the championship, that's for sure, and he is actually 4th in the championship now, as well as Jenson Button, which is crucial for him. He's only 2 points off Lewis Hamilton, so he's still been able to drag that car up there into decent positions. Speaking of dragging the car up into decent positions, let's move on to 5th place. Nico Hülkenberg, unbelievable drive. I mean, please give this man a top seat drive. I mean, unbelievable drive. The 2-stop, he made it work, and I knew instantly when the commentators said that he was going to go on a 2-stop, or they started to kind of figure it out that, well, and when I started to figure it out, that he was going to be a danger, and I even thought he might get a podium at one point. And I mean, he wasn't actually too far off Vettel when Vettel came out of the pits, to be honest. And I mean, obviously he didn't quite have the pace of Alonso at the end, but I mean, 5th is still an incredibly solid result for him and Force India, and it's kind of tough to tell where that Force India is now, because you don't really know if Hülkenberg is dragging that car up there into a position that it shouldn't be, or if the Force India is just quick, or if it's both. If that makes any sense, I guess. And I mean, with Perez out, you haven't really been able to see kind of how well that Force India, or how good that Force India actually is, when it's not driven by a mastermind in Nico Hülkenberg. But if he keeps doing that every single race, surely he'll get a better drive for 2015. And I mean, he's right up there in the championship as well, with 5th and 7th place. He's definitely ahead of Sebastian Vettel. He's probably like 5th or 6th in the championship as well, which is very, very good for him in a car that probably shouldn't be there, and it also helps Force India gain points that Perez has lost, I guess. So another good drive by him. Alonso, once again 4th place, obviously passed Hülkenberg towards the end. It was a pretty dull race for the front four, to be frankly honest, once the start kind of happened. Obviously he got overtaken by Ricciardo at the start, and then I was able to repass him, but Alonso had a he was just scrapping as usual, really. I mean, he's done very, very well in a Ferrari car that maybe shouldn't be up there. I mean, the Ferrari did seem a bit quicker this weekend, and he's still in a very good position for the championship. I think that was a crucial thing. 2 4th places puts him 3rd in the championship, 1 point off Lewis Hamilton, 19 off Nico Rosberg. But I mean, Alonso is only 1 point behind the championship favourite going into this season, so I think he'll be happy with that, considering the pace of the car after Australia, and saying that it had to improve, which I still think it does, but I think Ferrari have to develop pretty soon and early, and they need to start getting the results kind of in the European season. Because Red Bull are kind of in a different position where they could very well develop towards the end of the season and probably still dominate. But I mean, it's another great performance by Fernando Alonso, which helped in the constructors as well for Ferrari. I think they're third still as well. Moving on to third place now, Sebastian Vettel. Another superb performance by him. I mean, you just can't keep this man down. Probably one of the better drivers in his career, simply because he didn't have the fastest car. Obviously there'll be a bit of problems maybe that Vettel overtook Ricciardo under team orders, but I think he probably would have got him anyway. And I mean, he did have a bit of a go at Rosberg at kind of round lap 40ish, I believe, but Rosberg was just too quick in the end. And I mean, Vettel seemed pretty pleased with third place, and I mean, he probably would have liked the win, but I think he's now pretty confident that the Red Bulls can challenge. As he said in his interview for Sky, that he thinks that Red Bull are developing quicker than Mercedes already, which you could say they probably are, because you wouldn't have expected them to be third at Malaysia, to be frankly honest. And I mean, it's very, very ominous for the whole grid that Red Bull are already getting podiums, to be frankly honest, especially for Mercedes and Ferrari as well. So we may very well see that Red Bull dominating again later in the year. It really wouldn't surprise me. Nico Rosberg second. I mean, I think it was all about the start with him and Lewis Hamilton. I have a feeling that there was kind of a team agreement that whoever kind of got out ahead at the start, they weren't really going to try and challenge each other if there was a big gap. They were just going to kind of go for the 1-2 and conserve the fuel and the tyres. And that's pretty much exactly what they did. I mean, Rosberg had a bit of a challenge from Sebastian Vettel, but I mean, it wasn't really much. He just had another gear, as Vettel said, really. He kind of just went into, but I mean, Hamilton and Rosberg absolutely dominant in first and second, and I have a feeling I'm going to be using a Mercedes a lot in these race reviews in the background, as I always drive the winning car. So yeah, great 1-2 for Mercedes, kind of in one of their home races at Malaysia, obviously with Petronas. So a great result for them, a great result for just the whole of Mercedes. Great to see that Paddy Lowe talked about Ross Brawn after the race victory as well, saying how important he was as well in getting this 1-2 as well. So great to see there. Hamilton domination, got the treble, which was nice to see, and I actually got put him down for fastest lap on my Castrol F1 predictor, so that's positive for me, although I didn't put him down for the race win, which was a bit of a bummer. But I was very impressed with Hamilton overall. I mean, one of the best drives of his career probably. I mean, it was just so cool, calm and collected, which you don't normally see from Lewis Hamilton, and it's very ominous again to see that Hamilton can start driving as well as Rosberg in these conditions. But I guess we'll see over time how this Hamilton and Rosberg battle will develop, along with the rest of them, especially maybe Massa and Bottas. But yeah, another okay race, I guess. Hopefully the sound will be improved later in the season. Maybe Bernie Eccleston saying there could be improvement soon. But I mean, it was a bit of a procession, but I mean, it was still pretty good. So yeah, this has been the Malaysia or 2014 Malaysian race review from Mr. Miz Nation. And until China, or until my next F1 career mode video probably, until then, thank you for watching and goodbye.